Good evening and welcome to another in a series of live debates here on PLG TV 13. I'm Matthew Fogel, along with the editor of the Kentucky Standard, Forrest Berkshire, and Kentucky Standard reporter Randy Patrick. We're live from the PLG studio in Bardstown. Thank you for joining us tonight. Our debates consist of the races that are contested in Nelson County for the general election coming up on Tuesday, November the 4th. Tonight, we feature the two candidates running for the Kentucky State Representative here in the 50th District. We have with us Democratic challenger Audrey Haydon and Republican incumbent David Floyd. The 50th District of Kentucky used to include Nelson County and parts of Spencer and Bullitt counties, but now, however, it is just exclusively Nelson County. The order of speaking tonight is based on a coin toss done a few minutes ago, and the winner of that coin toss was Audrey Haydon, who will give her 2 minutes opening statement first. Ms. Haydon.
Thank you, and thank you all so much for hosting this. I think it's very important for the voters to be able to hear directly from candidates on where they stand on the issues. My name is Audrey Haydon. I was born and raised right here in Nelson County. My husband and I live in Bardstown. We both practice law with my father, and I'm very proud of the practice we have. We represent hundreds of individuals and working families right here in Nelson County. I grew up out in Cox's Creek, where my parents still live. My mother is a teacher at Cox's Creek Elementary School, and both of my grandparents are retired teachers. I'm a graduate of Nelson County High School, and my husband and I are proud to be making our home here and looking forward to welcoming our first child in this spring. I decided to run for this seat because I believe Nelson Countyans deserve a voice in Frankfort who will stand up for them and stand up for middle-class families. My priorities in Frankfort would be focusing on public education, creating jobs, and raising the minimum wage. And in the time I've been on the campaign trail, I've spoken to thousands and thousands of voters. I have knocked on over 5,000 doors myself personally, meeting people right there at their doors and sometimes sitting with them in their kitchens and hearing what's important to them. And those are the issues that I've heard them talk about and the issues that are near and dear to them. And those will be the issues I focus on as your state representative.
Thank you, Ms. Haydon. And now a 2-minute opening statement from Mr. David Floyd.
Good evening, and I want to thank you all for hosting this debate once again. It's really one of the few opportunities to actually have an exchange back and forth during this campaign season, and so I look forward to the evening, and I hope you do as well. I, too, was born and raised in Nelson County. I'm 63 years old, graduated high school here in 1969, I grew up on a farm out 245. And then I went into the Air Force Academy and then served a career in the Air Force. And when I returned to Kentucky in 1991, I was still on active duty in the Air Force. And eventually my family and I opened a business in Bardstown called Windsor Gardens. It's an assisted living community, and we've gradually added independent living and skilled nursing and personal care as well. Got to know a whole lot of people there. Sherry and I have been married. My wife Sherry and I have been married for 37 years, and we have 2 children and are expecting next month our first grandchild, and we're so grateful for that. And I know therefore how excited Denise and Ben must be that Audrey is due in March. And so we look forward to serving the next generation as well. I tell you, over these last years, I have also visited most every house in Nelson County during the campaigns, but not just during the campaigns, also while I'm serving you as your state representative. Almost every day, like today, I had 2 calls from constituents who are wanting help with stuff. And that's really the best part of the job. It ties with going into the schools and talking to the children, but the best part of the job is really hearing from you. And so I encourage you to do that, and I'm glad that you do, and I'll look forward to serving you if you'll give me that chance for another 2 years.
All right, thank you, Mr. Floyd. We'll go now to questions from the panel, and we'll have 3 minutes answers, up to 3 minutes from each candidate, and we'll have 1-minute rebuttals if you so choose, so just let me know. And for the first question, we'll go to Mr. Forrest Berkshire from the Kentucky Standard. Mr. Floyd will answer this one first.
First, I want to thank both of you for being with us tonight. This question is for Mr. Floyd. Ms. Haydon has said that you have put profits before patients in voting against bills that would require more extensive national background checks for nursing home employees and the creation of a new registry of nursing home employees who have findings of abuse or neglect? Is this a fair criticism, and why or why not? And could each of you please explain how you would vote on similar bills in the future?
That's a very good question. And of course, it's campaign time, and I think that a voting record is fair game. And so it's well and good to bring up a person's voting record, but what's not well and good is to imply things from that just are not true. The bills that were referred to in that ad were three bills, and it wasn't, the question wasn't quite accurate. It created a national database. A national and state database, a registry of those who have applied for jobs in the nursing home and hospitals and within the cabinet. And it required fingerprints of every one of them, as well as a background check. And but it also created a new registry, not just of abusers, but of everyone who applies for a job there. We already have a nursing abuse registry. We have to do that already. Every applicant for a job, no matter what the certified position, has to, we have to check for whether or not they're on the abuse registry. In addition to that, I voted for the similar bill, the one that was simply creating the adult abuse registry. I voted for that in each of the 3 years mentioned, and here are the records of each of those. They're available online, and I know you may be aware that I voted for them as well, but that was a standalone bill, and it was entirely different. The cost of this bill, notice there was an appropriation in each of those bills, and the cost of this bill would have been millions and millions of dollars. I know my opponent has said she wants every dollar to go to education. This is not necessary because every nursing home, certainly in my business, we're required to do a background check. The implication here was that I didn't want to do a simple background check on job applicants, but I already do, and I already pay for it. So in addition, the nursing home registry was also a separate bill, and I did vote for that. What the bills that she referred to did was create a larger and more intrusive government. It also required several different cabinets within the state government to hire additional people, and it's just not something that I could support. In fact, the bills didn't go anywhere. They passed the House, but they didn't pass the General Assembly. They haven't, and there's good reasons for that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Floyd, and now Ms. Haydon.
With respect to the three bills that are addressed in the ad, House Bill 250 was from 2012. That would have created a registry of individuals who were found by the cabinet. It's a separate finding to have abused or neglected individuals. And currently that information is not available. It is not easily searchable. And as an attorney, I even have had difficulty accessing that on behalf of children I have represented in child abuse cases. So I can speak to the fact that is not easy to access. Now, House Bill 73 and House Bill 277 were from 2013 and 2014, respectively. Those would have created, or would have required rather, that any nursing home owner check a national background check program, and that's far more extensive than what the statute currently requires. The current statute requires an owner to check with the Justice Cabinet to see if there are any Kentucky felony records only on certain specific felonies. This goes further. We don't know if they may have a felony in Tennessee and Indiana. That's what the FBI program would have done. And I think any information we can find that would give us more information about the kind of individuals who are caring for our elderly, for our seniors, for our loved ones is extremely important. And the fact that Mr. Floyd voted against all three of those bills speaks highly to the concerns that he's taken to the legislature. And he's indicated there's no additional cost to him, but in 2013 in front of a hearing on these bills, a nursing home executive from Louisville complained that it would triple his hiring costs because the national background check program would cost $63. There is a grant to pay for the first however few thousand of those, but going forward, the onus would be on the employer to pay that fee. And currently, the background check costs between $20 to $30 because, of course, you're not getting nearly the same kind of information. So that cost would be passed on to the owner. It would cut into their profits. And this gentleman went so far, who was testifying, to say that his concern with the background check, if it were mandatory, was that he would not be able to find enough employees to fill the roles at his nursing home. And that is disturbing to me, to think that the more information we have, we wouldn't be able to find enough qualified employees, which leads you to wonder what kind of people we have in the nursing homes currently. And it's no surprise that Mr. Floyd thinks that the agencies are too involved. Just in February of this year, an inspector following up on a complaint at his nursing home was denied entry to the nursing home, not once, not twice. Finally, on the third day, they were permitted to come in and perform an inspection relating to a complaint that had been called in. So all of this certainly is relevant. His voting history is relevant, and the fact that this pertains directly to his business interests is something that voters absolutely need to know about.
All right, thank you, Ms. Haydon, and we'll have a 1-minute rebuttal from Mr. Floyd.
Yeah, of course, the abuse registry is easily accessed by anyone. What the new bills would have done would be to create an adult and abuse registry for anyone, not just nurses and certified people. And those are the bills that I voted for. So there's a component of that that has been pushed, and I've fully supported it all 3 years that have been mentioned. And we do already perform background checks. And when I was the day-to-day guy there back up until about 2005, I actually received those background checks. And I saw that there were other things from out of state. So they don't just deal with felonies only, and not just, I mean, we got misdemeanors, we got charges that weren't convictions, and we also got some from out of state. I specifically remember one from Washington State. So yeah, it's a huge duplication of effort. There is a very good reason why that bill did not pass. And yes, I was one of those who voted against it.
Thank you, Mr. Floyd. And we'll move on now to the next question, and we'll have Ms. Haydon answer this one first, and to ask it will be Randy Patrick.
Ms. Haydon, you've said that Representative Floyd voted against legislation to provide revenue to cover the unfunded liability of the state and county employees' retirement fund and also the teachers' retirement fund. Is this accurate, and what changes, if any, need to be made to ensure the solvency of these funds?
Now, I do want to be clear, the teacher retirement system is totally separate than the Kentucky retirement system. The bill that you're referencing was House Bill 440 from 2013. There were two separate bills. There was a Senate bill that dealt with certain reforms of the pension system. House Bill 440 was an appropriations bill that put aside money for the pension fund. And Mr. Floyd did vote against that. Actually, he has claimed that Democrats across the state are using this bill to attack Republican incumbents, which is interesting when you consider 17 people voted against it in the House and 3 voted against it in the Senate, and all 3 of the senators who voted against it were Democrats who thought that the bill didn't go far enough. And in the House, a large number of them were also Democrats, yet all three Republican leaders, including the highest-ranking Republican, Representative Hoover, voted in favor of House Bill 440. And that bill, among other things, did provide the funds that are needed to make the actuarially recommended contribution that's needed to shore up the pension fund. Now, that's not a magic bullet to solve the problem, but that was a huge step forward that was praised by leaders on both sides of the aisles as a step in the right direction for making the Kentucky retirement systems a funded program that we can use to honor the promises we've made to our government, our state, local government retirees. Now, the teacher retirement system was not part of those specific reforms. And as far as I understand, there are some bills that are being looked at for the 2015 session to review some of the issues in the teacher retirement system. Back in 2000, that was a 95% funded program, and now it's under 50% funded. So we've got 50% unfunded liability there, and we owe the same promise to the teachers that we do to any of our other government retirees, and that's something we'll need to look at in the upcoming session.
Thank you, Ms. Haydon, and now Mr. Floyd.
Yeah. I guess there's a basic misunderstanding on my opponent's part of what that bill did with regard to the unfunded liability trust fund. There were no appropriations for it. There was a possibility of appropriation, but that's not how you fund the actuarially required contribution. It's just not done in that way. On the specific bill, House Bill 440, there were several objectionable things in it for me. One, of course, we had very little time to review the bill. I had about 30 minutes to review this 80-page bill. And that's troubling. Perhaps some people would like to pass a bill before they know what's in it. But part of it was that there was a tax increase on most every Kentuckian because of a reduction in a tax credit. I objected to that. Another part of it was that small business people, and I'm very well known for my support of small business, small business would have their reimbursement when they file their state sales tax returns. They get to keep a portion of that, and that reduced that, so that was harder on them. In the standalone portion of that bill, if you just separate all these 19 different sections, I believe it was, of statutes that were modified in this comprehensive bill on the last night of the session before the veto period, well, there was only, of all of those 19 sections, not a single one of them had been vetted in the House of Representatives in a House bill. Not a one of them, except for one. There was one that had been vetted, and that was creation of the KRS Unfunded Liability Trust Fund. It was House Bill 138. It was Tom Reiner's bill, and I voted for it. So the thing that she's saying that I did not vote for, I did. When they combined it with some other bad bills, in my opinion, they didn't. Now, the other critique she had was that I didn't vote the way that my leadership does. You know, in other venues, I'd be praised for that I am an independent voice, and that I do represent your interests. I don't think you like the idea of the tax increase that resulted from that, and I don't think that small business appreciated very much at all the reduction in the amount that they essentially get paid for collecting taxes for the state of Kentucky.
All right, thank you both. We'll move on to the next question, and Mr. Floyd will field this one first. And I will ask this one. Governor Steve Beshear has taken advantage of a provision under the Affordable Care Act that allows the state to expand Medicaid coverage to those up to 130% above the poverty level, with the federal government initially covering the additional cost. However, over the next 8 years, the state's share of the cost will rise and is expected to cost at least $473 million. Is this something the state can afford in the long term? And if Kentucky doesn't continue to fund the expansion, what alternative is there for helping those who have gotten Medicaid coverage to have some kind of affordable health coverage?
Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, the expansion of the program in Kentucky is done. It was done, I think, in a way that was not proper. The General Assembly doesn't think that it was done properly, that it was done all on the part of the governor. I forget how much I think they paid us, the federal government paid of your tax money, to implement the program here, and I think it was $200 million. $200 million, and that went for no health insurance. That went for establishing a website, and it went to pay people to travel out into remote areas and say, hey, sign up for this health care. You know, I don't know why anybody really boasts about having people sign up for health care when it's mandatory that you do so, or you face fines if you don't. And of course, the bulk of the people who signed up for this were already eligible for Medicaid services anyway. So this was an information effort that got people, for the first time, many of them, onto health care. As you pointed out, Matthew, the funding that comes with that is 100%, but then the piper comes to get paid here in a few years. You know, we have taken advantage of almost every Medicaid waiver available to any state. Our Medicaid spending is extraordinarily large. And what this has done is to increase it anymore. And those who cry out for increased funding in other areas, for example, education, will have to recognize that this is going to be very difficult in the future. It's going to call for quite a bit more tax money I forgot the number that you mentioned, Matthew. I think it was hundreds of millions of dollars. And we already struggle to meet all the needs that people are, all the different cabinets are asking for their budgets during the budget years. So, you know, it's a good thing that people who did not have insurance before have insurance, but it isn't free. It does come with a cost, and that cost will come down to you.
Thank you, Mr. Floyd. And now, Ms. Haydon.
Thank you. You know, when I've been out speaking with voters, I've had quite a few people who've told me that, you know, some people have said their rates have gone up, some people have said their rates have gone down. It's always a good thing when we're able to insure folks who were not insured before and make sure that they do have access to health care. But we do have to look at the long-term costs. We are constantly discussing in the state ways that we can increase our tax revenues to meet the needs that we already have, and at this point it is being funded by our tax dollars from the federal government, but in a few years we will have to find a way, if we're going to continue this program, to continue with paying those costs. So that's something we've got to take into account. On the one hand, we certainly don't want to take away insurance from folks who've just gotten access to it and are getting very important preventive care. But at the same time, we've got to consider the long-term implications to ensure our children, our grandchildren aren't having to make up this deficit. We are required in Kentucky by the Constitution to pass a balanced budget, and we've got to find ways to do that without cutting into other funding, like education or for seniors, for veterans, all kinds of programs that we pay out of our tax money. So something we definitely will have to consider down the road.
All right, thank you both. And we'll move on to the next question now. And we'll have Ms. Haydon answer this one first. And to ask it will be Forrest Berkshire.
The Republican leader of the House, Jeff Hoover, has said that Kentucky needs a right-to-work law to be more competitive with other states in recruiting and retaining businesses. Such a law would allow workers in unionized workplaces to opt out of paying union dues. However, studies have shown states that have such laws are poorer and have lower wages than states that don't have them. Do you think right to work would be a good or bad for our economy, and why?
Thank you, Forrest. Right to work laws are terribly, terribly named because they should be called right to work for less laws, as you've just alluded to. There's quite a few states. This is not a new concept. This has been available to states since the 1940s. There's a misconception, I think, that individuals who work at unionized factories are required to join the union. There's a federal law that prevents that. They can become fair share members, meaning or fair share, they pay a fair share fee to be there. And that's just for the basic services that are provided to them by the union, negotiating their contract, those kind of things. And not one penny of any union dues actually goes to their political activities. That's something that you often hear misstated. But right to work for less laws do, in fact, decrease the average wage. In states with right to work laws, the average income is about $1,500 a year less. They're less likely to receive benefits. Maternal health care and child health care is markedly lower because of the lack of benefits, and so many important employer protections are lost. Unions don't just stand up for union workers. They stand up for education. They stand up for workplace safety. They stand up for fairness. And frequently it's the union that stands between a corporation and an employee to protect their jobs when they need them the most. And we want to attract high quality jobs to Kentucky. We don't want to attract jobs that are low paying jobs that don't receive any benefits. And in other states that have passed right to work, in Indiana already they've seen the effects of incomes dropping. In Oklahoma, which was one of the only states to pass right to work laws in the last 20 years until the last few years, in the 10 years after they passed their law, 50,000 manufacturing jobs left the state, went to Mexico. So it has not helped in the past. It won't help in the future. And I do not believe that is the right path for Kentucky workers and Kentucky families. There's a reason that unions have helped build the middle class in this country. And without them, we will continue to see the erosion of the middle class and the erosion of benefits to Kentucky workers.
All right, thank you, Ms. Haydon. And Mr. Floyd, do you think right to work would be good or bad for our economy, and why?
You know, I don't think you need to go any further than Nelson County to the industrial development, the economic development people right here. And they say that, of course, you know, we compete. When a company wants to locate in a certain, anywhere in the country, they look at states, and they look at areas for certain things. You know, is for one thing, they look at schools. For another, they look at whether or not there's a 5,000-foot runway. They look at the workforce. But they also look at another factor, and that's whether or not it is a right-to-work state. You know, Michigan went to right to work state not long ago. And the reason was that they were losing jobs hand over fist, but they wanted to attract jobs. And our own economic development people, not just in Nelson County, but in the state, say right to work will make a big difference in bringing good paying jobs to Kentucky. And so that's why it's important. And it's you can use, you know, little slogans like right to work for less, but that's misleading. I can understand why somebody who's heavily supported by unions would say that, but you know, the truth of the matter is we do compete. And you talk with anybody who's involved in the industry recruitment effort here. We do compete heavily with other states, and especially the other states that surround us. And that's one of the things that would improve the way that we look to companies looking to relocate or to locate here, to build their businesses here, to bring all these jobs in. Kentucky Association of Manufacturers, the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, every job creation organization in this state supports converting to a right to work. Between the two of us, I've been the union member. My brother was a union steward. So I know the value of unions. But a union that is not valuable is one that I don't want to join. And so if a union exists and I believe that I get a return on my investment, then I will join that union. I don't believe that I should be forced to. In our schools, we have a very strong union, strongest union in the states, KEA, but you're not required to join that. So I think there is near universal understanding among all economic development people in this state that right to work would be a step forward in bringing jobs, one of the biggest things on everybody's mind, in bringing jobs to the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And I think the time may be now for that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Floyd. And you, Mr. Floyd, you will field this next question first. It'll go to Randy Patrick.
Mr. Floyd, I have another work-related question. Last year, there was a proposal to raise Kentucky's minimum wage from $7.25 an hour to $10.10 an hour over 3 years, which was the same as the federal proposal. Should our state raise the minimum wage even if Congress doesn't?
Of course, you know there's about, 3 or 4 states in the nation that don't have a minimum wage, but of course they comply with the federal law. The federal law is what rules in those cases. You know, I have supported an increase in the minimum wage. I think the year was 2007, and I voted for an increase, a gradual increase in the minimum wage up to its current level. When we in the General Assembly debated this, there was much back and forth, you know, on the philosophy of a minimum wage, what it could do to help. So one of the things that was inserted into that bill that raised the minimum wage was that henceforth it would be tied to the federal minimum wage. That was a deal that we made. I'm going to stick with that deal. And the benefit of that to Kentuckians is that Kentucky has one of the lower cost of living scales in the United States. And so any federal minimum wage that is in effect will actually be reasonable for Kentucky as compared to other states. The federal minimum wage debate that goes on in Congress, will continue to go on. Across time, the minimum wage has increased about every 5 years. The most recent one was after about a 9-year period. Now it's been about 7 years. There will be another increase in the minimum wage in the Congress. It'll just take either next year or the year after, but it will come. And since that was the deal that we made, that's the bargain that we struck, I'm sticking with that bargain.
Thank you, Mr. Floyd. Ms. Haydon, your thoughts on the minimum wage?
Well, Mr. Floyd's more optimistic than I am that our senior senator from Kentucky up in Washington is going to let anything happen on the minimum wage. Unfortunately, I don't see those folks up in Washington doing anything to help the workers here in Kentucky, and I think it's up to us at the state level to take that step. In the past, when we have raised the minimum wage, it has actually created jobs. It puts more money back into our economy. Studies show that when you raise the wage, that individuals put that money right back into their own communities, buying groceries, shopping, paying for goods, those kind of things. And it's no surprise with that in mind that Walmart has in fact in the past supported raising the minimum wage because it benefits them when more folks can shop at their store. I've seen a study that showed that to be able to afford fair market rent in Nelson County, a worker would have to make $11 an hour to be able to pay for a 2-bedroom home to support them and a child or 2 children. That's well above what the minimum wage is proposed to be raised to $10.10. It's a gradual raise, and it's something that we need to do. It's the right thing to do to lift workers out of poverty and give them the resources they need. Consider this. Walmart is the largest minimum wage employer in the state. They employ about 28,000 folks who work for $7.25 an hour. And we pay, you and me, the taxpayers, pay nearly $147 million in benefits to those 28,000 workers because they can't afford to make ends meet on that wage. That's money that we wouldn't have to spend if they were able to support themselves when they're working full-time. $147 million would pay for example, 2,200 public school teachers. It could go to so many other underfunded programs, but yet we're spending it to subsidize a corporate profit so that they can pay their workers less. So it's the right thing to do, and it's something that we need to do, and I hope it's something we'll take up in the General Assembly in 2015.
All right, thank you both. We'll move on to the next question now. Ms. Haydon, you will answer this one first, and I will ask this one. And it's a fairly long question. This is a question submitted by a PLG viewer. It's got a preface to it and then some questions. The Courier-Journal reported today that Kentucky has reduced the per-student investments in K-12 schools by 11.4% between 2008 and 2015 after adjusting for inflation. That ranks Kentucky 37 out of 47 states reviewed in the study by the Washington-based Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Kentucky schools are being funded at less than they were 7 years ago, and the legislature has mandated 2% raises for teachers next year. Kentucky's spending per pupil is $561 below pre-recession levels, adjusted for inflation. So the question from the viewer: what will you do to help adequately fund education for our children? And will you pledge to stop mandating unfunded laws, which often leave it up to the local communities to pick up the tab?
That is a long question. Education has always been something that I've found to be very, very important. As a public school graduate, as the daughter of a teacher, granddaughter of 2 teachers, in the last budget, we restored funding back to pre-recession levels without adjusting that for inflation. We've got to do better. Thank goodness this year we were able to put some new money into textbooks and some new money into classrooms, but every few years is not good enough. My mother had a book in her classroom, a textbook in her classroom that had been in 5th grade since I was in 5th grade. That's how old that book was. So we've got to prioritize education funding. We've got to do that now. We can't afford to wait. The difficulty is when employers are looking to locate, they want individuals who are educated, who are able to take up those jobs, and they do look at education as one of the things that they consider. And we've got to do better in that front. We need in Frankfort to show some leadership on this and to be able to allocate the resources to this problem, because our children can't wait. Early childhood education needs to be a top priority, starting at preschool and going all the way through.
Thank you, Ms. Haydon. Mr. Floyd.
The question seemed like it was phrased by a former school board member. I'd suggested it was probably Margie Bradford. Thank you, Margie, for the question. Yeah, of course we need to adequately fund education in Kentucky, and I think, where your heart is, where your money is, there your heart is also, right? And so that's where we put most of our general fund monies. I remember, I don't remember the year, but I proposed a constitutional amendment that would have increased funding and made it level at 65% of the general fund budget. And that was a constitutional amendment that I proposed. Many in the education business, educators and administrators alike, loved that. Some in the teachers union did not like it because they were afraid that it might not be enough. And so, you know, we obviously give priority to our education funding. It is therefore the most important budget item that we have. Everything, I think there's been 9 budgets on which we have reduced funding for every cabinet that's involved. The SEEK funding, and I know there's some talk about how that was, but we've always kept the SEEK funding. We haven't cut the SEEK funding. There's been some increases. And, you know, the financial folks at Nelson County High School, Tim will tell you there's more to the story than that, and I agree and I understand. But I also have noticed that there's been a lot of good news stories about education locally and across the state in the last several years. And this despite the reduction in funding. You know, I'm for fully funding and adequately funding everything involved with our public education system. But I also recognize that money is not the answer to everything. I think many school administrators will tell you that you can do many innovative things, saving money, and still have at least as good and probably a better education for the children in the meantime. There's some innovations that you can make as well. You know, we have talked in the past about charter schools. Charter schools are not the answer, but I will tell you that the education establishment in Kentucky believes that there's something good about them. I forget what year it was, but we passed a bill that called for school districts of innovation. And those districts of innovation are liberated from other constraints so that they could become essentially charter schools. And of course, Kentucky has the #1 high school in the nation. It's called Gatton Academy. It's down at Western Kentucky, down in Bowling Green. Gatton Academy is a charter school. And so you can do, while we will always we must have a public school system, there are ways that public school administrators, public school teachers know that we can do it better. And I will always fight for adequate funding for education.
All right, thank you both. And we'll go on to the next question now. Mr. Floyd, you will answer this one first, and to ask it will be Forrest Berkshire.
This question is also from a reader. Kentucky state and local income tax collections per person were $1,033 in 2011, ranking it the 15th highest nationally according to the Tax Foundation. Our gas tax is also higher than surrounding states. What will you do to lower the overall tax burden on Kentuckians?
Well, you know, one of the things that I've just done in the recent session was vote against a gas tax increase that the House majority pushed on. It was about a $60 million gas tax increase. I think of all the people, that would be what upsets them more than anything, was a gasoline tax increase. I think you could ask them to pay another $1 a day in income tax and it wouldn't bother them as much as a gasoline tax increase. We're all very sensitive about that. I've been known as a taxpayer's best friend in Frankfort. I recognize that we do have a need to modernize our system of taxation in Kentucky. There are several things that we can do. One of them would be to actually step down the percent that a person pays in income tax in Kentucky for depending on their income level. I think it's $17,000 a year, and below that you don't pay any state income tax for Kentuckians. Obviously, there's a federal tax debt as well. I don't think anybody would challenge my credentials as a person who fights to maintain, to keep taxes as low as possible, while maintaining operations of state government and providing the funds that schools need to get their job done as well.
Thank you, Mr. Floyd. Ms. Haydon.
Thank you. As I've said before, I support any reforms that will simplify the filing process and make it more clear what it is that we're paying and why. I do support looking at closing loopholes that allow corporations and individuals to avoid paying their fair share. Something else I would like to see the state take up is considering the earned income tax credit. This is a tax credit that we have at the federal level already that goes to working families who are low income. It's not available to those who don't work, but to working families to reduce their tax burden as well. And many studies show that money, that earned income tax credit, the money they would receive from that goes right back into their local communities and is spent right there at home, which then stimulates the local economy and is a great way to grow small businesses in our communities. We have to balance the needs of the programs that we run through the state with the tax burden, but we certainly don't want to increase the burden on middle class families. And in the legislature, that's something I'll fight to preserve.
All right, thank you both. Move on to the next question now. Ms. Haydon, you will answer this one first. To ask it will be Randy Patrick.
The Kentucky Senate this year passed a bill to require abortion doctors to offer women ultrasounds and have the results described to them, but the measure died in the House as similar bills have in the past. Could you say whether you would support such a measure and where you stand generally on the issue of abortion?
Well, I'll take up the second question first and then move on to the second question, then move on to the first question. I've said before, I consider myself to be a compassionate pro-life Democrat. I think that abortion is a tragedy and it's a terrible circumstance, and that's something that we need to work toward reducing in our society. In a perfect world, we wouldn't have any abortions, and that's something that we should all be striving for. But at the same time, we need to have compassion for women who find themselves in these difficult circumstances, whether that's by rape or incest or some other circumstance that was unexpected and tragic for them. And as a Democrat, I do believe that there are ways we can work to reduce the number of abortions. The measures that have been proposed in the Senate may or may not curb that problem, simply because many women who are seeking an abortion say they're even considering that option because they feel like they can't afford another child. And that, to me, is the greatest tragedy that we can imagine. There are things we can do to address that, like raising the minimum wage, like encouraging women with to be able to return to work with the daycare credit for low-income women, so they have a way to support their children when they go back to work. Unfortunately, I don't know that bills like this would reduce those circumstances. I can certainly say, as an expectant mom, that seeing the first ultrasound of my child was incredibly moving, and I can't imagine being in a circumstance where I would consider any other choice other than to welcome this child into the world. And it certainly is a powerful tool in that sense, but I think many women, when they've come to that place and that's what they're considering, the best thing we could do to be able to support them would be to show them that there is a way that they can welcome that child and that they have the means to support that child.
All right, thank you, Ms. Haydon. Mr. Floyd.
Of course, we didn't get back to the first part of that question, which was how would you vote on that bill? You know, the term compassionate pro-life Democrat is the same term used by the most passionate anti-pro-life legislators in the General Assembly. Mary Lou Marzian uses that. The same language, the same talking points. Tom Birch, the chairman of the Health and Welfare Committee in the House, who boasts openly about killing pro-life bills, he talks in the same way. The difference, there's only one medical procedure in this entire Commonwealth where there is not a face-to-face required with the physician performing the surgery, and that is abortion. The bills that we have been presenting across the years are there to provide more information to a woman. It doesn't force any decision on her. In the case of the ultrasound bill that Audrey dodged, it doesn't require anyone to look at it. It requires that it be offered. And as she vividly described, you know, viewing an ultrasound really brings it to home for a lot of people. That's what we're looking at. That's what we're dealing with as a child. You know, science has advanced so much, so well that we can now, you can almost hang one of those pictures on the wall as baby's first picture. It's really extraordinary. And so Yeah, obviously, Randy, I would support that bill, and I have time after time after time, only to have it struck down in committee by compassionate, pro-life Democrats.
All right, thank you both. We'll go on to the next question. Mr. Floyd, you will answer this one first, and I will ask this one. Mr. Floyd, you once favored capital punishments, but you've been recently recognized as a leader in the effort to abolish the death penalty in Kentucky. Could you please explain why you changed your mind on this issue? And Ms. Haydon, could you tell us where you stand on capital punishment?
Yeah, I guess I never really thought about capital punishment. Of course we'd have a death penalty. It never was anything that really entered my mind. You know, the movies, the hangings, the electrical chair, all those things, you just assume that that's the way life was. But then, of course, I had a faith experience that that's where I initially changed my mind. I think the most compelling thing for me is that we have the possibility of executing an innocent person. I don't know any mother, any father, any daughter or son who would say, for the good of this country or for the good of this Commonwealth, I'll sacrifice my mom, my dad, my daughter, my son. They may be innocent, but I'll sacrifice them so that those who are truly guilty may be executed for the crimes that they've committed. Are we really willing to sacrifice the innocent to execute the guilty? I'm not, but you might be. You may well be, and that's okay. I understand why you might be that way. But you have to also consider that execution, the capital punishment system, is a government program, and it's extraordinarily expensive. Since 1976, when Kentucky in a special session reinstated the death penalty, reinstated capital punishment, we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on prosecuting and defending. Most of these cases are defended by the public defender. Everything else gets put on hold. The public defender has complained about all their caseloads, how they can't, all the people out there who require defense for other things are put on hold while these cases are prosecuted and defended. Hundreds of millions of dollars, and in all this time there's been 3 executions. You know, I think Adam Edlin would think that would audit that system and say that it wasn't worth that. It's also got disparate application. You can commit a murder of one kind in Jefferson County and get prosecuted with the death penalty, but down in Litchfield they won't do it. But it's the same murder, same circumstance. There does seem to be evidence, and this is a traditional argument, that there's a disparate impact with regard to race and income level. And so, yeah, I did have a conversion. The Catholic Conference came to me and asked me to be the principal advocate for the abolition of capital punishment in this last legislative session. I want you to understand, though, that ever since I was elected, every time death penalty abolition has come up, I've co-sponsored that bill. I'm the same guy I've always been.
Thank you, Mr. Floyd. Ms. Haydon.
Thank you. As I've said before, I have reviewed the American Bar Association's report on the death penalty here in Kentucky, and I share many of the concerns that were raised by that report, such as the disparate impact that has on minorities and low-income defendants, as well as many other issues as far as the handling of evidence, the way that trials are conducted, the way that juries are instructed, and the fact that, as Mr. Floyd alluded to, you have two juries in 2 different counties or 2 different parts of the state with very similar circumstances that may be instructed totally differently and reach totally different results as far as the sentencing phase goes. There were some juries in this study that even pointed out they didn't know that they could consider certain kinds of evidence when they were determining what sentence was appropriate. So there are many issues I think need to be addressed currently before we consider the stay that's in place. Currently in the Franklin Circuit Court, there's a stay in place that prohibits the death penalty in the state until certain issues are addressed, and those are still being worked on currently. Of course, recently in the news, we've also seen lots of issues as far as the actual administration of lethal injection, which is what we have here in Kentucky. That raises a lot of concerns for me. But that being said, there are some circumstances that are so heinous and so terrible that I don't believe we should entirely take the death penalty off the table. I certainly think that victims' families have the right to ask for the death penalty, or to request that not be asked for in the trial of their, involving the death of their loved one. But there are certain crimes that I don't think that we should take it off the table. But we do need to address some of these concerns before we go forward with any executions or any other application of the death penalty in the state.
Thank you, Ms. Haydon. Mr. Floyd, 1 minute rebuttal.
Thank you. Not so much a rebuttal. I don't fault Audrey for anything that she said on that. I want everyone to understand, though, that capital punishment is currently reserved for the most heinous crimes. It has to be aggravating circumstances. If you're for a system of capital punishment, but only for the most heinous, that's what we have. That's what we have, and that's where all the problems are. And that's still one thing that I didn't bring up was that of all those convictions, people sentenced to death and on death row, well over 50% have been exonerated, have been either let go or been guilty of a lesser offense. So you know that we have executed innocent people in the past, and we can execute innocent people in the future, and I hope to change that.
All right, thank you both. And we actually did want to get 2 more questions in, so on these next 2 questions, we'll move it to 2-minute answers. And if you so choose to have a rebuttal, we'll have those to be 30 seconds. So 2-minute answer, Ms. Haydon, you'll answer this one first, and to ask it will be Forrest Berkshire.
One of the key measures in the Republicans' Kentucky handshake this election cycle is establishing a review panel that would evaluate medical malpractice lawsuits before they could proceed to court. Do you support this extra step between the public and the courts?
I've said before, and I'll say again, I believe in the Constitution. I believe in the Bill of Rights. I believe in the First Amendment. We're both here tonight expressing our opinions. I believe in the Second Amendment. That's why I'm a gun owner. And I believe in the Seventh Amendment, which gives us the right to a trial by a jury of our peers. And fortunately, our juries in Kentucky are very good at understanding circumstances and making fair decisions in cases. Now, the medical review panels that you're referencing, Forrest, actually would address a couple of different things. One of them is medical malpractice cases. They would also create a nursing home abuse review process as well. The most disturbing thing to me is that there are over 2,200 known cases of deaths that were caused by preventable medical errors in Kentucky, but only 500 cases were filed. So as you can see, we aren't even filing close to even a quarter of the medical negligence cases that could be filed in this state. Most people don't realize we don't have a liability crisis. Less than 5% of the cases in our courts involve personal injury of this type. The bulk of the cases are corporations suing other corporations, family law cases, all kinds of other cases that don't involve these issues. And in 5 states, these medical review panels have been declared to be unconstitutional as a way of standing between people and their access to the courts. In 7 other states, they've been rescinded because they just quite frankly weren't working. In Indiana, which the Republicans tout as this great program, the review process is supposed to take 6 months before you can file your case into the courts. It's actually been taking as long as 23 months. And when you're dealing with an elderly patient who is abused in a nursing home, 23 months may be the difference between her being able to testify and share her story with jurors at trial and unfortunately not getting to share her story. All these do is limit access to the courts and try to save money for corporations. And there's no wonder that they're pushed by insurance companies looking to limit their liability.
Thank you, Ms. Haydon. Mr. Floyd.
I think the handshake with Kentucky was more broadly applied to tort reform. There's a student from Bardstown, Kentucky, who went to U of L medical school, and when she was about to graduate, she got a letter from North Carolina who said, and they said to her, why don't you come do your internship or whatever the medical people call it. Over here, our liability rates are a lot lower than they are in Kentucky. Kentucky's a good target for lawyers because that's, of course, how they make their living, is by filing lawsuits and using every aspect of the law, and it is the law, it's not a loophole or anything, in order to try and in order to try to help people, or to even file what you might call frivolous lawsuits. Kentucky's well known for that, not just in the nursing home, but in a lot of areas. It's a very fruitful place for attorneys, and other states recognize this, and we're trying to recruit, especially medical people, to come practice there instead of in Kentucky. Eventually, that person did go to another state, but she's back here now, and we're grateful for that. So, yeah, the larger issue is on the handshake with Kentucky is if we are able to flip the House. It's been 100 years, almost 100 years of the current majority controlling the House of Representatives, and there's a whole lot of things in that handshake that we can do to make Kentucky better, to make us more attractive for jobs, and to control, to help people in the Commonwealth.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Floyd. 30 seconds.
Thank you. There are already means in the law that prevent the filing of frivolous lawsuits, and one of them is just a practical thing that, as an attorney, I have to front the expenses for any of my cases. So there's absolutely no reason for me to file a case that I know has no merit, only to be out of pocket as much as thousands and thousands of dollars if we're dealing with a medical negligence case, only to lose that. And beyond that, Rule 11, which is in the Civil Rules of Procedure, prevents an attorney from filing a meritless claim. And if I am found by a judge to have done that, not only can I be sanctioned for that, but I can be on the hook for paying attorney's fees to the other attorney for, in essence, wasting their time. So that's already something that's dealt with in the law, and this is duplicative.
All right, thank you both. We'll move on to the last question, and Mr. Floyd, you'll answer this one first. Once again, 2 minutes per candidate, and Randy Patrick will ask this one.
And this is also a question submitted by one of our readers. Mr. Floyd, if you're reelected, would you push for tax modernization even if the legislative support is questionable? And what are 2 or 3 ideas that you would endorse to modernize Kentucky's tax code?
Obviously, and that's part of our tax, or rather our Handshake with Kentucky plan is tax modernization. You know, I thought that I'd brought with me some of the recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Commission, and you know, one of the recommendations in there, which I would certainly support, is property tax reform, and this eliminating the state's portion of that property tax on businesses. Another one that was part of that recommendation that I could support, and Audrey's already mentioned, is the Earned Income Tax Credit. It's a very effective way, far more effective than many other ways at getting money into the economy and working in the economy. Another thing that was part of that recommendation, and which I actually championed and has been passed, was the Bourbon Barrel Tax Credit. While preserving the tax, the ad valorem tax that goes to local schools and local governments, it also it preserved that for the locals, but the state would forgive it if there was a capital expense on the part of the distilleries in order to offset those costs of expansion. I think inherent or implied in that was that they would also do hiring, and so I'm a little. I don't know. I don't know all the facts, but I do understand that at the local distilleries, they're working 7 days a week, some of them, or others 6 days a week in 11-hour shifts, and they're not doing the hiring that they should be doing. And I wish they would use that to do the additional hiring that would make life better for a whole lot of people.
All right, thank you, Mr. Floyd. Ms. Haydon.
As I did mention earlier, the Earned Income Tax Credit was one of the things that's been discussed as a way to modernize the tax code. Beyond that, I do think we need to look to encouraging a robust business economy here in Kentucky, and the House Bill 445, which did include the Bourbon Barrel Tax Credit, that was put forward by Representative Rand. That's something that has been a help, and they did hire some new folks at Barton's, I believe, under that, and I think that it'll continue to grow and to benefit our economy. Another portion of that bill was the angel investor program that allows individuals who are interested in investing in new businesses or in existing businesses in counties with especially high unemployment. They can receive up to 50% tax credit for what they've invested there. In counties that have lower unemployment, the reimbursement rate or the investment forgiveness there, the tax forgiveness is less. But those are both measures that encourage businesses to create jobs, to put people back to work, to encourage the economy to grow that way. And of course, the more folks we have working and earning an income, just like the earned income tax credit, their dollars get spent right back here at home that goes back into our economy and stimulates our economy at the local level all the way up.
All right. Thank you both. And that'll do it from questions from our panel. And now we'll go to closing statements, 2 minutes each on these closing statements. And we'll have Mr. Floyd give your 2-minute closing statement first.
Well, thanks very much. I appreciate, again, the opportunity to be here with you at PLG TV and the members of the Kentucky Standard editorial board to be here as well. It's always a great pleasure to talk with you about the issues. It's been also a great honor to serve you these last 5 terms as your state representative. You know, there's a whole lot of things that I benefit from in this job personally. The biggest one is that I'm able to serve you in a way that is pleasing to you. I do get calls from you almost every day, and I do also get around to you. One of the best things that has happened is that from the very first year I've been able to go into the schools and I talk with the children in the 5th grade or the 4th grade about representative democracy. And it's a great time for all of us, I think. By the time, in some of the classrooms, by the time I walk out, they're shouting the 3 most important words in America: we the people. You know, we have another election, and I think you know what you'll get if you'll re-elect me. You'll get not just a person who works hard, but a person who gives it all, and more importantly, is an accurate reflection of the opinions and values of this district. And also somebody who has the courage to vote that way, despite what anybody in his party says. There's also something that you could potentially lose. And what you would lose is the most accessible legislator in Frankfort, at least in the House of Representatives. And that's not just during an election year, but all year round. There'd be no more coffee with Dave, no more school visits, no more columns that talk to you like we're sitting around your table at home. I ask you once again for your vote and your confidence. I'm so grateful for your support in the past, and I hope I can count on it in the future as well.
All right, thank you, Mr. Floyd. And now we'll have a 2-minute closing statement from Ms. Haydon.
Thank you all for your questions tonight. They were very insightful, and I hope they were helpful to viewers in understanding our positions better on these issues. It's time for a fresh face. It's time for change in Frankfort. My opponent's been there 10 years, and in 10 years, he's passed 7 bills, and we've paid him $500,000 in this session that he was the primary sponsor of. In this past session, he put forward 14 bills, and none of them have become law this time. And he doesn't update us on that in his column. We need someone who will go to Frankfort and fight for our middle class families and fight for the values that are important to Nelson County. And you've heard about the Republicans' handshake with Kentucky and what they want for the state, and it's modeled after the state of Alabama. And Alabama have good football and they have nice beaches, but they rank behind Kentucky in early childhood education, in K through 12 education, in job creation, in personal income growth. In just about every field, they rank behind us. But yet, for whatever reason, the Republicans want to model the future of our state after Alabama's. That is the wrong approach for the Commonwealth, and that is the wrong path for Kentucky. And when I'm in Frankfort, I'll ensure that the Commonwealth continues to move forward.
All Great. Thank you, Ms. Haydon, and thank you from Mr. Floyd for being here with us tonight here on our live debate here on PLG TV 13. I'm sure we'll hear more about this race in the next coming weeks before November the 4th, so stay tuned to PLG and the Kentucky Standard for more on this race. Reshowings of this debate will be held this coming Saturday, October the 18th at 3 p.m., and then Sunday, October the 19th at 3 p.m. as well. Look for it also to be uploaded to our website at plgtv.com. Thanks to the panelists beside me tonight, Kentucky Standard editor Forrest Berkshire and Kentucky Standard reporter Randy Patrick. And a special thanks to our producers John White and John C. Gritton and PLG's Jamie Sizemore and Kim Richardson for their work as well. And a special thanks to Mike Vidito with the Bardstown Cable for his work as well. Thanks for joining us tonight, and most importantly, be sure to go out to the polls and vote on Tuesday, November the 4th. Have an excellent evening.